Today's daf is daf Nun Aleph, and in order to make a safe departure, let's just review. We're trying to figure out whether or not the Minchas Chavitim of the Kohen Gadol is Doche Shabbos, overrides the Shabbos, and overrides Tumah, if let's say the Kohanim are Tmeim, and they could just bring this Mincha in Tumah, they don't have to wait till they are Tahorim. And the Gemara had various derivations to try to answer the question, Minani Mili, from whence do we derive this conclusion? And the second of a series of three possible Makoros sources for this halacha of overriding the Shabbos and overriding Tumah was that of Abaye, and that was all the way on the bottom of Nun Amid Beis that we saw yesterday. And he derived it from the Pasuk Tamid. It says Soles Mincha Tamid. Tamid means on any day. And that means that the Tamid, and included in the Tamid because of the Pasuk that seems to attach Mincha to Tamid, and the Mincha here is the Minchas Chavitim, and the word Tamid teaches you that you override the Shabbos and you could bring a bit Tumah. So we're going to start now with Rav on the top of Daf Nun Aleph, and he has the third makar from which we derive the halacha that the preparation and the baking of the Minchas Chavitim is going to override the Shabbos, and he's going to base it on the fact that there's Kiddush B'Kli Sharis. So let's see how Rav derives this. Al Machvas, when the Torah describes the way that the chavitim are prepared, it's made al machvas. And as you recall, we have two categories of menachos. One is a machvas mincha, the other is marcheshes mincha. And the machvas mincha is made on a flat griddle. And from the fact that the Torah says that the chavitim has to be al machvas, the machvas is a kli. Malamed she'te'una kli. Kli means that in order to prepare the baking of the minchas chavitim, you have to put it into a kli. Now, here's the logic of Rava. V'i afile me esmol, if you're going to tell me that the minchas chavitim of Shabbos, because the minchas chavitim had to be brought on every day of the week, so let's assume it was prepared yesterday, because you don't want to override the Shabbos. But that can't be, because if so lebelina, since the Kiddush took place already at the time that they baked the Chavitim before Shabbos, then since it lasted overnight till Shabbos, then it's possible belina. So therefore, the only conclusion that we could derive is that Minchas Chavitim overrides the Shabbos. And you have to bake it on Shabbos, because otherwise there'd be a psul of lina. And the Gemara now supports Rava with a brisa. Tanya Kavase de Rava. And the brisa that's going to support Rava is also going to base itself on the same pasuk that Rava invoked, namely Al Machvas, Malamid Shetuna Kli, that the baking of the Chavitim has to be done in a Kli Shares. And if it's done in a Kli Shares, then it has to be on Shabbos itself. It can't be the night before, because then there'll be a psul of lina. And then the pasuk continues and says, Ba Shemen. And we're going to have a long discussion about that one word, that extra word, Ba Shemen. And according to the brisa that's being quoted now, the word Ba Shemen, because that word is superfluous, we already know that, like other menachos, that the minchas chavitim has to be blula b'shemen. So why did the Torah have to add b'shemen in the pasuk referring to the chavitim? Lahosif la shemen. And we're going to have a machlokas as to, or at least a havamina as to how much shemen you need. That's going to be the discussion for today's daf. What is the volume of shemen that you need for the minchas chavitim? And there's going to be one Havamin, at least, that it's one lug. At the end, we're going to determine that it's three lugim. But how do we know that it's more than one lug? Because one lug would have been the basic amount of shemen. So the word bas shemen, which is, as we said before, was totally redundant, is coming to teach you, according to this brisa, la hosif la shemen, that it goes beyond one log of shemen. You need more than one log of shemen for the minchas chavitin, but v'yeni yodea kama, I still don't know exactly how much above the one log we need. Is it 1.5? Is it 2? Is it 3? And therefore, haredi dan. Now, the words haredi dan are sort of like an introduction to a very complicated brisa that we're learning now, which has what we call klach lecha and then klach lecha, which means we're going to have two possibilities as to how to derive the volume of shemen that has to be added to minchas chavitim. So that's called haredi dan. Haredi dan means now we have to open our minds and start analyzing this, so that we can come to some definite conclusion about, again, I repeat for the third time, the volume of shemen that has to be added in the preparation of the minchas chavitim. So now we have Roman numeral number 1, the first possibility. Nemar kan shemen. With regard to the minchas chavitim, we have the word shemen, and we're going to derive a gzeira shava because nemar lahalon b'minchas nisachim shemen. Now, keep in mind that minchas nisachim, which is basically the mincha that accompanies every carbon ola, every carbon shlomim, and it's a chova, as opposed to the next round, which I call hakafa shtayim, which is going to be a minchas nedava, which is a voluntary mincha. But now we're talking about a minchas chova that must accompany, together with niskei yayin, the carbon ola and the carbon shlomim. And there also, in the parsha of minchas nisachim, the word shemen appears. And he tells you here that this is in Vayikra Perek Vav. Okay? And the Minchas Nisachim will go beyond the basic in terms of, again, the volume of Shemen. The basic is derived from the Minchas Nedava. The Minchas Nedava, which is a voluntary mincha, has to have one log of Shemen. But here, in the case of Minchas Nesachim, which, as we said before, is a mincha shel chova, we have to go beyond one log. And how much do we need? Again, this is based on a Gemara much later on in Menachos. Malahalan shloshes lugin lisan. For every isaron of flour, you have to add 3 logim of shemen. Afkan, and now since we also have the word shemen in the parsha of Minchas Chavitim, so too shloshes lugim liisaron. But again, let's make a note of this, that the shloshes lugim requirement is lamaskana. We're not yet at that point. We have to go through an o klachlecha. O klachlecha means let's try a different approach. And in this second approach, we're going to compare the minchas chavitim of the Kohen Gadol not to a minchas chova, which is called minchas nesachim, but rather to a minchas nedava, where the one log is sufficient. And nemar kan shemen, v'nemar b'minchas nedava shemen. So now we have a minchas nedava, which is voluntary. A person brings through a neder, he takes a neder that he's going to bring a mincha, and that mincha is called a minchas nedava. It's a voluntary mincha, and there we require only one log. One log is enough. And since we have now the possibility in this klachlecha, which I call Roman numeral or hakafa beis, a possibility of comparing minchas nesachim, minchas chavitim to minchas nedava, then we come to the conclusion that minchas chavitim doesn't require more than one log of shemen, like a minchas nesachim, like a minchas nedava. Is malahalan log echad, afkar log echad. And now, when we have two possibilities, we don't know whether to compare the Minchas Chavitim to a Minchas Nisachim, which is a chova, and requires 3 logim, or to Minchas Nidava, which only requires 1 log. We don't know which way to go. We're at a Parshas Drachim. Nira Lemi Doma, done it. Lemi Doma means, is the Minchas Chavitim, the Minchas Kohen Gadol, is it more similar to a Minchas Nisachim or to a Minchas Nidava? Now, for this, the Brisa gives what's called a mnemonic device. And the mnemonic device will give me 3 letters, each, or otherwise known as nutrican, and each letter will indicate a dimension of mincha that is common. First, we're going to go through those 3 elements of a mincha that are common to, again, minchas chavitin to a minchas nesachim, and then another 3 elements which are common from the minchas chitin are common to a minchas nedava. So first we start with the minchas chova, and that's called, in the language of the Brisa, that is called tashat. Tashat means tuf shin tet. What's tuf shin tet? Tashat. Number 1, tuf is tadir, because this mincha is brought continually. As long as you have a korban ola or a korban shlamim, you have this mincha. And then we're up to the shin, which refers to Shabbos. And a minchas chova is docha Shabbos. And if we equate minchas chavitin to minchas chova of all nisachim, of all menachos, then we come to the conclusion that minchas chavitim, like all menachos that are chova, are docha Shabbos. And number 3, we get to the tet of tashat, and that is docha tuma. So that means even if the kohanim are tmeim, they will bring the mincha. V'ein donin misha eino tashat, as opposed to a minchas nedava, which is lacking A, B, and C. Number 1, because it's a nedava, then it's not tamid, it's not continuous. It all depends on whenever somebody comes forward and voluntarily takes it. Number 2, it's not docha Shabbos, because a korban nedava is never docha Shabbos. That's why, by the way, on the side, we don't have a tefillas nedava on Shabbos. And then we get to the tet, which refers to tumah. And tumah is not going to be over, if the kohanim are tmeim, they cannot do the avoda of a minchas nedava. And now we're going to go into the other approach, that dafka we should compare minchas chavitim of the kohen gadol to a minchas nedava because of another 3 similarities, and that's called yagal. Now, what's yagel? I should say, or yagal. So we have the yud, and then we have the gimel, and we have the lamed. What's the yud? This is the simple one. That's yachid, meaning as opposed to a minchas nidava, as opposed to a minchas nesachim, which is a chova, we have now, in the case of minchas nidava, let me start again. I'm sorry, I got a little confused here. It's Purim. As opposed to minchas nesachim, which is a korban tzibur, we have a minchas nedava, which by definition is a korban yachid, and likewise the kohen gadol's minchas chavitim is a korban yachid. So that's the yud, and then we go on to the gimel. What's the gimel? Biglal atzma. Now, this is interesting. A minchas nisachim, as we said before, accompanies either a korban ola or a shlomim. It doesn't come on its own. Whereas a minchas Nidava comes on its own, and for that matter, a minchas chavitin of the Kohen Gadol is a separate, independent mincha that is not meant to accompany any karban. In other words, the Kohen Gadol is not bringing a karban for which he has to accompany the karban with his minchas chavitim. The minchas chavitim stands on its own. That's called gimel biglal atzma. And then finally we get to the lamed, and that's levona, which means that in the case of a minchas nidava, we add levona, a certain kind of a spice. And again, it might be an element of simcha, as opposed to, let's say, a minchas chote, which is certainly not appropriate to bring levona. And the fascinating thing is that the minchas chavitim of the Kohen Gadol is meant to be accompanied with levona, even though you would say, well, it's a chova, it's not a nidava, but yet nevertheless it does have that addition of levona, which is the lamed here. And therefore, ein donim misha eino yagel, meaning we don't compare the minchas chavitin to a minchas nesachim, because the minchas nesachim, number one, is a karban yachid. Number two, it is a mincha that accompanies the karban ola or the karban shlamim. Number three, there's no levona. So at this point in the brisa, we're at a dead end. We really don't know how many lugim of shemen have to be added to the minchas chavitin. Is it the 3 logim of a minchas nesachim, or is it the 1 log of a minchas nedava? And here's where Rabbi Shmuel ben Osha Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka steps up to the plate, as quoted now in the Hemshech of the Brisa, and he quotes a pasuk, Soles Mincha Tamid, which again is in the same parsha that we mentioned earlier, which is Vayikra Perek Vav. And that pasuk is in the parsha of Minchas Chavitim. On the previous Amud, Abaye had quoted that pasuk Tamid, if you recall, at the bottom of the previous Amud, to prove that the Minchas Chavitim overrides the Shabbos. So that's Tamid. However, now Rabbi Shmuel is going to throw a curveball into the entire brisa that we've been learning until now, and he's going to say that in the Minchas Chavitim, it adds the word Tamid to generate a comparison to the karban Tamid, which, as we know, is a karban ola that's brought twice a day, the morning and the afternoon. Harei lecha ki minchas tmidim. Now, the mincha that accompanies the karban tamid, which is a karban ola, is the minchas nesachim that we said before requires 3 logim of shemen. Is ma minchas tmidim shloshes lugim lisaron, harei afzu, here too in the case of minchas chavitim, shloshes lugim lisaron. So that's Rabbi Shmuel. So at the end of the day, we're going to compare minchas nesachim to a mincha of a chova, as opposed to a mincha of nedava, and specifically we're going to hone in on the minchas tmidim. Rabbi Shimon Omer, riba kan shemen. I have a different reason, says Rabbi Shimon, why I want to compare the minchas chavitim to the minchas tmidim. And that is because, according to Rabbi Shimon, the word bas shemen, if you remember we emphasized that word earlier, teaches me, because it was a redundant word, that you need more shemen than a log shemen. And where else do we find, says Rabbi Shimon, that we need more than just a log shemen? Riba, we have an increased amount of shemen, b'minchas kvasim shemen. right? We're talking about the mincha that accompanies the tamid, and there too we require 3 logim of shemen. Is malahal and shloshes lugim lisar nafkan. Here too, in the case of minchas chavitim, we require shloshes lugim lisar. Now, at this point, we seem to have come to a final conclusion in this brisa. And if the brisa had stopped here, quit while you're ahead, we would know that the volume of oil for minchas chavitim is 3 logim. But yet, oklach l'derech su. Now you get to hakafa gimel. And what is that? And again, it's not clear whether this oklach l'derech su that we're about to learn now is an extension of Rabbi Shimon or it goes back to Rabbi Shmuel. Riba kan shemen, which sounds very similar to Rabbi Shimon, excuse me, because Rabbi Shimon is the one who darshans that ba shemen means more than a log of shemen, which is called a ribui. And again, we're talking about minchas chavitim. For riba b'minchas parim ve'elim shemen. So now we have a mincha that accompanies a korban of parim, which are bulls, and elim, which are rams. And there we have a whole new volume that we haven't even encountered until now of shemen. Malahalon, with regard to the minchas parim ve'elim, there's a ribui of shemen, meaning beyond 1 log. But how much is it? Shnei lugim lisar nafkan, and therefore maybe we should derive the conclusion of ribui shemen to ribui shemen. The minchas chavitim has ribui shemen, and the minchas parim ve'elim has ribui shemen. Is afkan shnei lugim lisar, and the minchas chavitim should require 2 lugim lisar. So basically, we're left with 3 possibilities as to what should be the volume of shemen in the minchas chavitim, whether it's 1 log, 2 logim, or 3 logim. Do we compare the minchas chavitim to the mincha that accompanies the tamid, right? The minchas tmidim, which is 3 logim, or should we compare it to the mincha that accompanies a par or an ayil, which is only 2 logim? And once again, we're going to have to do the same analysis that we did before, nireh l'midoma. Should we compare it to this or should we compare it to that? On the one hand, we should say danin mincha haba isaron, mincha haba beisaron, which means that in the case of the mincha that accompanies the korban tamid, the minchas tmidim, the halacha is that you have to bring 1 isaron of flour. And in that sense, the minchas chavitim should be compared to the minchas tmidim. V'yein danin mincha haba beisaron, mincha haba l'shnayim u'shlosh esronim. And we should not compare the minchas chavitim, which requires 1 isaron, to the mincha that accompanies the par or the ayil, which requires either 2 or 3 esronim, depending upon whether you're talking about an ayil, which requires 2 esronim, or a par that requires 3 esronim. But in any event, you have here the possibility of either 2 esronim or 3 esronim. And the Gemara immediately stops here at the point of the brisa to point out that there's an inner contradiction in the brisa gufa kasha. Amrit bashemen lo of shemen. You told me that the word bashemen teaches you that 1 log is not sufficient. But hadar tani, and now you're going to tell me that we should compare. Again, that was the hakafa shtayim in this brisa of klach lecha eitzel minchas nedava, and hadar tani nemer kan shemen nemer minchas nedava shemen. So you're completely oblivious to the ba shemen that tells you to go beyond 1 log and as a ribui, and instead you're going to focus on the word shemen and compare the word shemen in minchas chavita with the word shemen in minchas nedava to teach you that all you need is 1 log. Amar Abaye, man tana bashemen lahosif. Only one of the Tanoim quoted in this brisa darshans the word bashemen to teach you that you go beyond one log, and that's Rabbi Shimon. Ubedina man komahadir Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel does not accept that drasha of Bas Shemen. And therefore, Rabbi Shmuel will not accept the equation or the Gzereshava, we'll call it, between Minchas Chavitim and Minchas Nedava. I'm not sure what I just said. Did I say he does not accept or he does accept? I forgot. Anyway, let me just correct myself in case I said the wrong thing. Rabbi Shmuel does not have the drasha of Bas Shemen to go beyond one log, and therefore Rabbi Shmuel is open to the possibility of equating Minchas Chavitim with Minchas Nedava, which means one log is sufficient. So that's the way Abai wants to reconcile this brisa. However, of Huna Beredi Rabbi Shmuel, he has a different way. Kula Rabbi Shmuel Benosha Rabbi Yochanan Broki. The entire brisa is Rabbi Shmuel. You asked me now a stira as to whether or not we should accept the possibility of an equation to Minchas Nesachim, which would mean, I'm sorry, to Minchas Nedav, which would mean one log, or perhaps to a mincha that accompanies a carbon tamid, which is three logim, or a par, which is two logim. Hachi kamar. Here's what the brisa means to say: Bar Shemen lohosef lo shemen, meaning the drasha bar Shemen according to Rav Huna is accepted by Rabbi Shmuel as well, not just Rabbi Shimon, and therefore Bar Shemen tells me to go beyond one log. Why is this word Bas Shemen completely superfluous? Because I don't need any word to teach me that I have to add Shemen to the Minchas Chavitim, al Machvas. Now, Machvas requires that you add Shemen. And Minchas Machvas Damya. So therefore, I don't need the word Bas Shemen. However, we're still not at home plate because we still owe Eino El Likvol Shemen. Maybe the Bas Shemen comes to establish that you require Shemen to Ilo Kos Rachmana Bas Shemen Havamina to Heavy Minchas Chote. Now, Minchas Chote has no Shemen in it. A Minchas Chote is another kind of a mincha, and therefore we're arguing that we need Bas Shemen, and Bas Shemen is not in Minchas Chavitim is not superfluous because we don't know if Minchas Chavitim should be compared to a Minchas Chote, and therefore you drop the element, the ingredient of Shemen. Chodar Omar, therefore the Brisa comes back and says, Tehevi nami likvol Shemen. And even if I grant you that I need Bashemen, Lafuke Minchas Chote, to teach you that you need oil in the Minchas Chavitim, Teise Midina. I have a logical reason to derive this. Vidon Dina Velo Asyale. And then I could derive this through a comparison, a logical comparison between Minchas Chavitim and Minchas Nesachim of the Minchas HaTamid, which would jack up the requirement to 3 logim of Shemen, but lo asyale. Even though we tried to make that attempt, we did not succeed, because maybe we should compare it through Yagel to the 3 commonalities to Minchas Nidava, which would require only 1 log. The Itzrich Kra, now I need the pasuk, Soles Mincha Tamid, and Tamid introduces the Minchas Tmidim, and the Minchas Tmidim will prove that you need 3 logim of Shemen, not like the analogy to Minchas Nedava, which required only one log. Kinemisayim Rabbi Shmuel Milsa, and that's the final conclusion, as we saw in the Brisa of Rabbi Shmuel, that you need 3 logim. So again, according to Rav Huna, the entire Brisa is Rabbi Shmuel. Now we get to a third possibility to reconcile this contradiction. Rabba Omar Kula Rabbi Shimon, the whole Brisa is Rabbi Shimon, going to the other extreme. And now Rabbah is going to have to analyze the Brisa in the light of Rabbi Shimon, because Rabbi Shimon derives from Bashemin, if you recall, that you need a ribui of Shemin, more than one log. And then the Brisa says, well, maybe we'll compare Minchas Chavitim to a Minchas Nedava to drop the amount from 3 logim to 1 log. How can you say such a thing when the word Bashemin, according to Rabbi Shimon, derives more than 1 log shemen? And the answer is ve'ilulo nemar kamar. The Brisa is saying that had the pasuk not stated what it did, then the following would have been our logic, and maybe we would have to prove that chavitim require 3 logim. Hachi kamar ba shemen lahosif lo shemen. Okay, once again, we're going to say that Bas Shemen, and going according to Reb Shimon Darshins, that it goes beyond the requirement of 1 log. Again, we're going to go through that logic that Machvas teaches me that you have Shemen, so there's no need for the pasuk to add Bas Shemen in the parish of Minchas Chavitim. Kevan d'chsiv be'al Machvas, k'Machvas damya, and a Machvas is a carbon that needs Shemen. And if that be the case, once you're introducing a minchas machvas, then you could talk about a minchas nedava, which again lowers the volume of oil that's necessary for the shemen of minchas chavitin to 1 log. V'ad shelo ye'omar bashemen yeshli bedid. And even if the Torah had not added the word Bashemen, l'chora, I could have had a logical conclusion to derive that 1 log of Shemen is sufficient. Exact opposite of what we said in Rav Huna, that we require 3 logim. Now we're saying 1 log. V'dan dino lo asyale, and we try to derive the halacha that Minchas Nesachim should be similar to Minchas Nesachim, to a Minchas Nesachim that would jack it up to 3, and that wasn't successful because it's more reasonable, and we have the Yagel to equate a Minchas Chavitim with a Minchas Nedava, the Itzrif Bashemen, and then all of a sudden I realize that I need the word Bashemen as an extra redundant word, which originally he had it. And the reason for that is because I was not successful, because maybe we should compare it to a minchas nedava, and then we get to 1 log. So I'll just read to you, he sort of summarizes it here. He says the Brisa cites the dissenting opinion of Rabbi Shmuel, that's at the end of the Brisa, that we should learn minchas chavitim and 3 logim from the tamid, right, from the requirement of tamid. And when you compare chavitim to the minchas of minchas chavitim to the minchas nesachim of the carbon tamid, and then the Brisa goes back to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon that we derive from Bas Shemen, that you need more than 1 log of shemen, and explains that the word Bas Shemen reveals that a greater amount of oil is required above and beyond 1 log, and we learn from a comparison to the mincha of tamid that 3 logim are required. Hadar Amar. Okay, who's the Hadar Omar? He says it depends on different girsos, but apparently it's either Rabbi Shmuel or Rabbi Shimon, we're not sure. Tehevi kabinchas parim v'elim, and then we drop the requirement from 3 logim down to 2 logim, and Hadar Omar, and therefore we go back, and again, whether it's Rabbi Shmuel or Rabbi Shimon, we don't know. And on the top now of Nun Aleph Amid Beis, Mincha Ba Isaron. So we're going to compare it to another Mincha that comes with 1 Isaron, as opposed to Elim and Purim.